Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. My close friend Stella made some questionable decisions last month and sent some private pictures to someone she thought she could trust. She only knew his first name, Mike, his gaming username DarkRider85, and that he lived somewhere in Canada and worked in tech sales. He mentioned he'd be traveling to Boston for work soon, and they had tentatively planned to meet up. When Stella noticed some concerning red flags in their conversations and decided to cancel their meeting, Mike immediately turned hostile. "If you don't meet me," he messaged, "these pictures are going straight online. I am, as it happens, an attorney." "Give me a few hours," I told Stella when she called me crying. "I'll handle this." Using the photos he'd sent her and his online handle, I started digging. His TikTok page was filled with gym selfies and crypto advice, which led me to an Instagram profile that displayed his full name, Michael Anderson. "Got you," I muttered, following the trail to his LinkedIn page. There he was, wearing the same company-branded polo shirt from one of his photos, listed as a senior sales representative at TechFront Solutions. A few more targeted searches yielded the email addresses of TechFront's CEO, VP of Human Resources, Director of Operations, and Head of Public Relations. "Time to make your life interesting, Mike," I said as I composed my email. I attached screenshots of his threats about revenge porn, snippets of conversations showing his username alongside that company polo picture, and links establishing his identity. For good measure, I included photos he'd sent of his Kawasaki motorcycle with the license plate clearly visible. The evidence kept mounting: screenshots of him discussing workplace incidents with timestamps, explicit messages about having sex with an ex in the office supply room, and his plans to hook up with Stella in his office when she visited. This idiot had even sent a picture of his work laptop displaying his entire Outlook calendar and what appeared to be confidential client information sent to prove how busy and important he was, plus several workplace photos featuring his unsuspecting colleagues. "Let me be clear," I wrote in the email. "I will be forwarding all this evidence to your local law enforcement. Since Mr. Anderson indicated plans to travel to the United States, I'll also be notifying the FBI, as threats against a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil constitute a federal crime. Should you proceed with his employment and planned business trip to the States, I will ensure federal law enforcement greets him upon arrival." I didn't mention that the assistant U.S. attorney for our region happens to be my old law school roommate. "One more thing," I added, knowing his license plate number had already given me his address. "Your local authorities will be receiving this information package tomorrow morning. You think you're safe behind your screen name? That you can threaten my friend without consequences? It took me exactly 45 minutes to dismantle your entire life, you pathetic excuse for a human being." The next one is an entitled people story. This whole situation with my neighbor has gotten so ridiculous that I need to share it somewhere. Maybe you all can tell me if I'm crazy or if this is as absurd as I think it is. My wife and I bought our dream house last summer. It's a beautiful property with a large backyard and an in-ground pool that was one of the main selling points for us. The previous owners maintained it perfectly, and we were excited to enjoy it during the hot summer months. Everything was great for the first few weeks after we moved in. We got settled, unpacked our boxes, and started getting to know the neighborhood. That's when we met Karen. Not her real name, but trust me, it fits. She lives in the house behind ours, and our properties share a back fence line. The trouble started one Saturday morning in July. I was working from home in my home office, which has a view of the backyard, when I noticed movement by the pool. At first, I thought it might be my wife, but then I remembered she was at work. I looked closer and saw Karen in a bathing suit making herself comfortable on one of our pool loungers. I went outside, completely confused about what was happening. "Excuse me?" I called out as I approached. "Can I help you with something?" Karen looked up, completely unfazed, like she owned the place. "Oh, hi! You must be the new neighbor. I'm Karen from next door." "Yes, I know who you are," I replied, trying to keep my cool. "But I'm wondering why you're in my backyard using my pool without permission?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't worry about that. The previous owners and I had an arrangement. I've been using this pool for years. They were such lovely people, always happy to share." I took a deep breath. "Well, I'm sorry, but we're not the previous owners. This is our private property and we're not comfortable with neighbors using our pool without permission. It's a liability issue." Karen's friendly demeanor vanished instantly. "Excuse me? Do you know how long I've been using this pool? 5 years. The Hendersons never had a problem with it. They understood what being good neighbors meant. I'm sorry, but that arrangement was between you and them. We never agreed to it, and we'd appreciate it if you'd leave now." She gathered her things in a huff, muttering under her breath about stuck-up new people ruining the neighborhood. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The very next day, I caught her in our pool again, this time with two friends I'd never seen before. They were drinking wine and playing music like it was their private beach club. "Karen," I said firmly, "we talked about this yesterday. You can't use our pool without permission. Please leave now or I'll have to call the police for trespassing." "Go ahead," she shouted. "Call them. I'd love to explain how you're disrupting years of neighborhood harmony. The Hendersons would be ashamed." I didn't call the police that time. Instead, I documented everything with photos and videos just in case. I also installed security cameras covering the pool area. Over the next week, Karen came back 4 more times, always when she thought we weren't home or watching. Each time I asked her to leave, and each time she got more belligerent. My wife and I decided to take action. We contacted a local fencing company and had them install an additional 6-foot privacy fence around the pool area, complete with a locked gate. It wasn't cheap, but it seemed necessary at this point. We also put up no trespassing and private property signs, just to make things crystal clear. The day the fence installation was completed, I heard screaming from the backyard. It was Karen, standing at her property line, phone in hand, absolutely losing it. 911? Yes, I need to report a violation. My neighbors have illegally blocked access to the neighborhood pool. They've installed an unauthorized fence and are preventing residents from using a community facility. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I went outside with my phone recording and heard her giving our address to the dispatcher, claiming we were violating neighborhood bylaws and creating a public safety hazard. 20 minutes later, 2 police officers showed up. Karen was waiting for them at the front of our house, ready to lead them to the crime scene. I met them with our property deed, pool permits, and documentation of Karen's previous trespassing, including security camera footage. The officers listened to both sides. Karen insisted that the pool was a neighborhood amenity, claiming she had documentation from the previous owners, which she never produced. She even tried to argue that 5 years of use gave her some sort of legal right to access the pool. One of the officers, Officer Scott, was trying hard not to smile as he explained to Karen that private property doesn't work that way. "Ma'am," he said, "any arrangement you had with the previous owners ended when they sold the property. The current owners have every right to secure their private pool and prevent unauthorized access. In fact, they're required by law to have proper safety measures in place." "But what about adverse possession?" Karen demanded. "I've been using this pool for 5 years. That gives me rights." Officer Scott shook his head. "That's not how adverse possession works, ma'am. It requires much longer periods of continuous use, typically 20 years or more in this state, and it can't be based on permission from a previous owner. What you're describing is just trespassing." Karen's face turned bright red. "This is ridiculous! I'm calling my lawyer!" "That's your right," Officer Scott replied calmly. "But I should warn you that any further attempts to access this private property without permission will result in criminal trespassing charges. The owners have made it clear you're not welcome, and they have documentation of previous incidents." The other officer, Officer Baker, then turned to me. "Sir, you've done everything correctly here. The fence, the signs, the security cameras, these are all appropriate measures. If she continues to trespass or harass you, don't hesitate to call us." Karen stormed off to her house, but this wasn't the end. Over the next few days, she started a campaign to turn the neighborhood against us. She posted on the neighborhood Facebook group about how we were destroying community spirit and acting like elitist snobs. Some neighbors actually defended her at first, saying the Hendersons had been more community-minded. But then something interesting happened. Other neighbors started sharing their own Karen stories. Apparently, she'd been a nightmare neighbor for years, constantly overstepping boundaries and acting entitled. The pool was just her latest fixation. One neighbor, Tom, commented, "Karen, remember when you tried to claim my garden shed was on your property and threatened to sue until the survey proved it was completely on my land? Or when you demanded I cut down my maple tree because it was blocking your view?" Another neighbor, Maria, chimed in, "Or how about when you called the HOA on me for painting my front door dark blue, claiming it wasn't an approved color, even though you had painted yours the exact same shade 2 years earlier?" The neighborhood support quickly shifted in our favor. Several people privately messaged us apologizing for initially siding with Karen and sharing their own horror stories about her entitled behavior. A week later, we received a certified letter from a lawyer representing Karen. It demanded that we restore neighborhood pool access and threatened legal action for disruption of established community amenities. The letter was poorly written and full of misquoted legal statutes. I forwarded it to my cousin, who happens to be a real estate attorney. He laughed out loud when he read it and helped me draft a response that thoroughly demolished every ridiculous claim in Karen's letter. He included relevant case law about private property rights and pointed out that making false claims to emergency services, like Karen's 911 call, is actually a criminal offense in our state. We sent the response to Karen's lawyer and copied Karen directly. 2 days later, we received another letter from her lawyer, this time apologizing for taking the case and informing us that they would no longer be representing Karen in this matter. The cherry on top came when our home insurance agent, who we'd contacted about the situation, sent us a letter commending us for installing the security fence and cameras. They explained that allowing unauthorized pool access would have been grounds for denying any claims if accidents had occurred. They even gave us a slight discount on our premium for the additional security measures. Karen hasn't tried to access our pool since the police incident, but she's still making her displeasure known in petty ways. She installed bright security lights that coincidentally point directly at our pool area. We solved that with some strategically planted privacy trees. She also starts her lawnmower at 7 a.m. every Saturday, right when local noise ordinances allow. But here's the best part. Last week we hosted a pool party for our neighbors, the ones who had supported us through this ordeal. We could hear Karen's angry vacuuming through her open windows as the sound of laughter and splashing carried over the fence. Several neighbors commented that it was the first drama-free pool party they'd attended in years. The whole experience has taught us valuable lessons about standing our ground, documenting everything, and the importance of knowing our rights as property owners. It's also shown us who our real neighbors are, the ones who respect boundaries and understand that being part of a community doesn't mean being entitled to other people's property. As for Karen, she's recently put her house up for sale. The listing specifically mentions close proximity to private pools as a neighborhood feature. We had our lawyer send a gentle reminder about truth in advertising, and that line mysteriously disappeared from the listing the next day. I'm sharing this story partly as a warning to new homeowners. Document everything, know your rights, and don't let entitled neighbors bully you into giving up your property rights. And if someone tries to claim adverse possession of your pool, remember Officer Scott's advice. That's not how any of this works. Update. Since posting this story, we've had quite a few interesting developments. Karen's house sold surprisingly quickly, but not before she tried one last power play. The day before her final walkthrough with the buyers, she attempted to show them their pool access by trying to lead them through our back gate. Thankfully, our security cameras caught the whole thing, including her struggling with the lock and telling the buyers about the neighborhood pool arrangement. I happened to be home and went out to correct the record. The buyers were horrified when I explained the situation and showed them the police report and legal correspondence. They actually thanked me for being there to clear things up, saying they'd been suspicious of several claims Karen had made about the property and neighborhood. Karen was furious, of course. She screamed about me sabotaging her sale. But the buyers went through with the purchase anyway. They just negotiated a significantly lower price after discovering Karen's dishonesty about various property features. The new neighbors are a lovely young family who brought us a bottle of wine and specifically mentioned how much they appreciate clear property boundaries. They've already installed their own small above-ground pool, which Karen must have seen while driving by because she left an angry review on the pool company's website about them enabling antisocial behavior in the neighborhood. The pool company's response was priceless. We're sorry you're upset about your neighbors exercising their property rights. Perhaps we could interest you in your very own pool package. We're running a special on privacy fences too. Our security cameras, which we decided to keep running even after Karen moved, caught her driving by the house several times during her last week in the neighborhood. Each time, she slowed down to glare at our pool area. But thanks to the fence and cameras, that's all she could do. Glare. The neighborhood has been wonderfully peaceful since Karen left. We've hosted several more pool parties, and neighbors often comment on how nice it is to enjoy a drama-free gathering. Some have even thanked us for standing our ground, saying it inspired them to address similar boundary issues they'd been avoiding with other neighbors. Our cousin, the real estate attorney, has added our case to his collection of entitled neighbor stories he shares with new homeowner clients. He says it's a perfect example of why it's important to document everything and not let unauthorized property use become a habit. Looking back, while the situation was stressful at the time, we're glad we handled it the way we did. By staying calm, documenting everything, and following proper legal channels, we were able to protect our property rights without escalating the situation unnecessarily. The support from both law enforcement and our other neighbors proved that standing up to entitled behavior, while uncomfortable at first, is usually the right choice in the long run. As for our pool, we're enjoying it more than ever. The privacy fence has turned our backyard into a peaceful oasis, and the security cameras give us peace of mind. We've even started a tradition of hosting monthly neighborhood pool parties with proper invitations and everything. It turns out that when you respect boundaries and treat people with courtesy, creating a genuine sense of community is actually pretty easy. And somewhere across town, we hope Karen has finally learned that being a good neighbor doesn't mean being entitled to everything you want. It means respecting others' property and rights. Though based on some local Facebook group drama we've heard about, we're not holding our breath on that one. Final update, 6 months later. I wasn't planning to post another update, but something happened last week that I just have to share. It turns out our story with Karen wasn't quite finished after all. Remember how I mentioned she'd moved across town? Well, apparently she joined a local community board in her new neighborhood and started stirring up trouble there, but this time, her entitled behavior came back to bite her in a major way. A friend who follows the local news sent me a link to an article about a recent city council meeting. Karen had been appointed to her new neighborhood's architectural review committee and was using her position to harass her neighbors over ridiculous things like paint colors and garden ornaments. Sound familiar? But here's where it gets good. One of her new neighbors did some digging and discovered our old police report about the pool incident, along with several other complaints from our neighborhood. They presented this history at a public meeting where Karen was trying to deny someone's request to install a backyard playground. According to my friend who attended the meeting, Karen tried to argue that she was just protecting property values and maintaining community standards. But when the council members saw the pattern of behavior, including the false 911 call at our house, they voted to remove her from the committee immediately. The best part? The city council has now implemented new guidelines requiring background checks for community board appointments, specifically looking for history of property disputes and misuse of emergency services. They're informally calling it the Karen Rule, though obviously not an official documentation. This prompted me to do a quick check of the property records. My cousin, the real estate attorney, taught me how. Karen's new house already has a for sale sign up. Apparently, she posted on Nextdoor that she's moving to a more appreciative community that understands proper neighborhood standards. Translation, she's looking for somewhere her reputation hasn't caught up with her yet. Meanwhile, our neighborhood has gotten even better. The new family that bought Karen's old house has become great friends with everyone. They helped us organize a neighborhood block party last month, and guess where we held the main gathering? Yep, around our pool. We set up a proper system now. Any neighbor who signs our liability waiver and follows our pool rules can request to use the pool for special occasions. It's all properly documented and goes through our homeowner's insurance. Most importantly, it's our choice who we share with, not something anyone feels entitled to. The security cameras and fence we installed during the Karen incident have actually become a selling point for the neighborhood. 3 other families have installed similar setups, and our local crime watch coordinator uses our setup as an example of proactive community security done right. My cousin says our case has become something of a legend in local real estate law circles. He's been asked to give a presentation at a real estate law conference about the evolution of neighborhood property rights in the social media age. He's planning to use our security footage of Karen's 911 call as an example of how not to handle property disputes. Last week, we got a surprise visit from Officer Scott, who handled the original incident. He was doing a community follow-up and wanted to see how things had turned out. We showed him our new pool setup and the documented waiver system we've put in place. He was impressed and asked if he could use our case as a training example for new officers dealing with neighborhood disputes. "You guys did everything right," he told us. "You documented everything, followed proper legal channels, and didn't let emotions take over. Plus, you found a way to be generous with your property while still maintaining clear boundaries." That's exactly what we try to teach people. The whole experience has actually made us better homeowners and neighbors. We learned exactly where our property lines are, what our rights and responsibilities are, and how to handle difficult situations professionally. We've even helped other neighbors deal with similar issues, though thankfully nothing as dramatic as our pool situation. Looking back, I'm glad we stood our ground with Karen. It would have been easier to give in at the start, to avoid conflict and let her keep using our pool. But that would have just encouraged more entitled behavior and probably led to bigger problems down the road. Instead, we set clear boundaries, documented everything, and handled the situation legally and professionally. Yes, it was stressful at times, but it taught us valuable lessons about home ownership, neighbor relations, and standing up for ourselves. Our pool is still the neighborhood gathering spot, but now it's on our terms. We host regular pool parties, especially during holiday weekends, and everyone understands and respects the rules. It turns out that most people are perfectly reasonable when you treat them with respect while maintaining clear boundaries. As for Karen, we heard through the grapevine that she's looking at houses in a gated community, ironically with strict rules about property use and resident behavior. Sometimes the best lessons come from experiencing the other side of your own entitled behavior. The Karen rule at the city council has sparked some interesting discussions about community governance and neighbor relations. Several other nearby towns are considering similar background check requirements for their community boards. It's nice to know that our experience might help prevent similar situations in other neighborhoods. So, that's the final chapter in our pool saga. From entitled neighbor drama to positive community change. It's not the outcome we expected when we first caught Karen trespassing in our pool, but it's definitely the one we're happiest with. Sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't just solve your own problem. It helps create positive change for everyone. Except Karen, of course. But that's a problem of her own making. The next one is a malicious compliances story. This happened some 15 years ago, but a recent post on here reminded me. I once worked in a municipal archive as an employee of a contractor company. As in, the city contracted the firm and they contracted me and a few other people to do the work. We had an abandoned cinema full of pallets, each with a mountain of file boxes we had to index and catalog, since the archive had been unattended for something like 30 years. Of course, they gave us the shittiest contract they legally could and paid us literal peanuts for a high-qualification job with legal responsibility, but I was young and needed the money. So, our bosses got paid per job, but we got paid monthly. They wanted the job done as quickly as possible so they could take another one and started pressuring us to do a sloppy job in order to finish quickly. They were in a different city, and their latest idea was to call us on the phone every day 2 minutes before our time to go to ask what had we done that day and pressure us. The calls would go for maybe half an hour, making us late. We were in a remote town with horrible transport connections, and we didn't drive, so if we didn't go out on time, we'll have to wait hours for the next bus, plus an hour-and-a-half bus ride home. I guess the idea was to punish us and hope we'll go quicker so they won't need to extend the call to pressure us. But they didn't want to admit to, I guess they legally couldn't, so they just said they needed to be updated daily. Cue malicious compliance. After the second time they pulled that shit, I started spending at least the last half an hour of every workday pulling together a very tediously detailed, so.tediously.detailed.so.tediously, written report of everything we did that day, and emailing it to them at precisely my clock-out hour. Then, when they called, I said, "Don't worry, you have the daily update in your inbox. It took me half an hour. Now it's my time to go home. Bye," and hung up. Of course, work got delayed by at least half an hour each day, but what could they do? I was strictly complying with their request for information in writing and with every little detail so they don't need to remember. And legally in Spain, they couldn't fire us without justification unless they canceled the project with the city. They did call me back for a different project, but when they realized I wouldn't stand for other shit they tried to pull, they actually canceled the project and let me go. They had the gall to still promise to call me for another one soon. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.